Hi, I'm Eric Glass, and welcome to Work Talk, where we discuss the most important issues facing your business with some of the brightest minds in the business. And today I have Greg Pryor joining me, Vice President of Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness at Workday. That is
quite a title, isn't it?
That's a mighty title, Greg. I hope you live up to it in this conversation.
I was hoping that the title alone would actually get me an invitation on to speak with you. That was my whole objective in negotiating that title, was to get here.
So let's dive right in. Why are companies rethinking performance management?
It's only been a couple of years, actually, since people started to really raise this topic, and now we see, I think the latest Deloitte study says something like 89% of companies are actively looking at reimagining performance management. And if you look at that, sort of even the history of performance management, it really grew out of sort of a very industrial age. You were really trying to sort of find some small group of people who weren't performing.
Right.
And, I just don't know of any business who can afford the amount of hours and the amount of time that people spend in this space to do that. We really need to be helping our people be successful moving forward. I think that that's really the essence of one of the big differences here is, you think about performance management, it just fundamentally suggests that you're trying to manage that person's performance. You're trying to sort of plan, lead, organize, maybe control. And that's just not quite as relevant in today's world. One of the things that I think, and as I've done some of this work, is to take much more of a design thinking approach to it and really put the person in the center and say, well, what would you do if your goal was to actually enable someone's success rather than to, build a process that was looking to prove them wrong?
So if you think about it in the context of performance enablement versus performance management, you've sort of gone through what some of the differences are, but if you sort of look at those two names, what do you think performance enablement really evokes differently?
To your point, I think there are really three things that are driving it. I think one is just the fundamental different nature of work. Work itself has changed, and we know that, and we have to build new practices to support that. I think the second is the use of technology and the application of technology. And then I think there's also real big generational differences that we know, and those three things coming together are creating a real imperative to reimagine performance management.
So then, big question: what takes its place?
I think that's actually what people are surprisingly grappling with. There are some people who are just sort of abandoning things and saying, well, I know I didn't like that review or I don't like those ratings, and they're sort of taking a step back and walking away from things in general. And there's been some new research, actually very, very current research, that suggests that that's quite a dangerous thing, actually. And I think actually we're in a time where people are being really clear and saying, well, what should we do moving forward? What does that practice look like? And I think to some degree it's going to look different for different organizations. There's really good and interesting research on what's called idiosyncratic rater bias, which is something that I'm sure you'll be talking about at dinner tonight.
Yes.
But what we know is when we only get a rating from one person, actually the research would suggest that rating is actually much more about the person providing the rating than it is actually on the rater, the person being rated.
Right.
And so to the degree we can get more feedback, that we can get peers involved in providing more feedback, I think that will be one of the elements. I think we'll also move from this sort of episodic, either once a year or twice a year sort of big reveal to much more continuous, where the work of enabling someone's performance is actually embedded in the daily work that people do. And the third thing I think that will be true about what's moving forward is that it will be much more about a look forward than a look back. I think it's sort of moving to how do you improve versus how do you prove what you've done in the past. That's, the water under the bridge is perhaps interesting, but not always particularly helpful in moving forward.
Well, and I think that's also in more parallel to the way that the business even thinks of itself.
You shift from this idea of I'm managing a process or I'm trying to achieve an outcome to fundamentally I'm trying to help that person be successful. There's an amazing study done by a very large pharmaceutical company where they very specifically measured the engagement of employees for 1 year following a fixed rating system. And they found they could literally see that following someone's rating, the engagement would drop sometimes for 6 or 7 months following the
incredible.
engagement. Even when people were rated at the top of the rating scale, a 1 on a scale of 1 to 5, their engagement dropped for 2 months, actually, on average, because of this idea of, well, then I must be a this, or I'm only that. And so when we now look at the brain science on this idea of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, having a conversation that's about looking forward, that says, you know, this is what I believe you can do. You might not be able to do it yet, but even just the power of that word yet, I believe that you will be able to do that. It just changes the way we're able to perform in really interesting and exciting ways. And that heritage performance management process really, unfortunately, marginalized a lot of people.
Got it. Got it. And let's just drill in even a step further on technology.
Sure. So I think some of the things that we'll see, again, from a productivity perspective, there's a lot of very good energy around looking at how we look at contribution goals, how we make those productive, how we look at actually helping people, be successful by setting clear goals. And so as we see that sort of baked into the technology more, helping you manage your time, helping you manage your priorities, helping you sort of pursue your goals, I think that will be an important component of it. What we know from the research is that people who have a clear set of goals, who pursue those goals, however large or small, whatever time frame they are just more successful. They're clearer-minded in what they're going to pursue. They know what those key results, what those milestones, what those objectives are, and it's an ongoing discussion with their manager. I think as we look forward, we'll see the idea of connections, of actually looking at one's social graph, if you will, the collegial relationships that you have, and actually weaving those in very clearly, helping people actually map their contribution goals to their colleagues or their connections. That does two things for us. One is it provides a sense of who are the people who are going to help us actually accomplish those goals. That is the way work gets done today,
right.
But we've typically not put that lens on it in the past, and so sort of this connections lens, and then having those people, once we've identified them, be part of a group who gives us feedback, whether it be on the quality of our contribution goals, whether it be on the capabilities that I'm trying to grow and develop as a person, or whether it be on the quality of our relationship. I think we're going to see more and more of our technology and our tools helping bring those to the surface and allowing us to use that on a much more sort of continuous way to help us be successful.
So how does compensation kind of play into this, more continuous way of thinking?
Yeah. So I've had the great pleasure to work with Dr. David Rock. He's a social neuroscientist and done really amazing work in this space. And he talks about that our brains scan 3 times a second for 5 conditions, and that's status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. In the time I've said that, your brain has scanned for that 18 times. And what we know from a fairness perspective is that we actually do need a thoughtful, consistent way to pay people, to compensate them, to recognize them relative to their contribution. And so that is critically important. What equally we've discovered, though, is that the rating that we've historically had didn't necessarily do that. So my experience has been is that any organization that moves to a new sort of modern performance management process needs to be really thoughtful about how they do that they give just enough guidance and enough discretion to their managers to be thoughtful, to be fair in the way they do that. And then my personal bias is to provide just enough structure to do that, and then literally no more.
What changed it for you? I mean, what really grabbed you about sort of this process and where it's going?
I was working at a previous organization before coming to Workday, and we were actually sharing a renewed set of values, a renewed sort of culture to the organization. And one of our colleagues raised his hand and said, "I love where you're going from a cultural perspective. And by the way, our performance management system is a violation of our values." And I jokingly say when we put the defibrillator back on the wall after having revived myself and our head of HR, I actually realized I had this sort of this stupiphany that that it was so incredibly clear all of a sudden that that in fact this engineer was right, that the heritage performance management system wasn't consistent with the organization's values, and that at the end of the day what I realized was it actually just wasn't helpful. When we began to ask people what was important? What helped you be successful? They were very clear and articulate about setting a set of things like, I have stretch goals. I know what is expected of me. I work with colleagues who I respect and who energize me. And they would equally say, what doesn't help are forced ratings and rankings, performance appraisals where I just feel bad about the great contribution that I've made, and feeling so marginalized. So many organizations for so long had said, I have to have some percentage of ones and needs improvement,
right.
and I can only have
right.
some percentage of fives. And I just think we're moving much more toward people require authenticity and transparency and just to be helpful in the future. And I actually think 50 years from now people will look back and say performance management, giving people a rating. Why would we have done that? That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Those companies that are ready to really sort of make that shift toward performance enablement, what would you say are maybe the first three things that they really need to think about doing to make that happen? Yeah,
it's a great question, and I'm asked this question quite a bit, and always happy to share this answer. I think the first thing is that you're intentionally moving towards something that's important for your company, and so that process should not be a random act of HR. It should not be something that because I read it in this week's Business Week or in the New York Times that this was important to do, or I'm embarrassed to share it at a dinner party that we're still using old school ratings. That should not be the reasons. Those should be some examples of why not to do this. You should first absolutely be moving towards something. So how do you enable your culture? How do you live your values? That whatever that practice is should be aligned with your brand, should be aligned with your culture, should be directed to some business needs. And so you're not just running away from something, you're very intentionally running towards something. I think the second thing is to be really open and thoughtful about what has not worked in the past, and to engage people in the process of saying, so what should we do moving forward? And really use design thinking to be very intentional about what you should do moving forward. And then the third area, which candidly surprised me the first time I did this a little bit, was it actually does require more training and preparation and communication with both employees and managers than candidly I would have thought. And so really being intentional, helping people through the journey, giving both managers and employees the skills to have these more thoughtful, more authentic, more productive conversations, how to receive feedback, how to give feedback to others, and really how do you weave this into the fabric and the cadence of your business.
Well, Greg, it sounds like this is this is just the beginning of what's going to be a really, really fascinating area to watch, and absolutely appreciate you coming on and chatting it through with us. And this has been another episode of Work Talk talking about performance enablement. Thanks for watching.